This is Greg Pass with the Americans in Wartime Museum. I am in Arlington, Virginia at the Women's Memorial, and I'm with Edith Dissler. Thank you so much for sitting down with us and being willing to tell your story.
Yeah, thanks for doing this project.
So what brings you here?
I have some art displayed in the Uniting Us gallery exhibit out here. And so I came back at Anne Marie's request to come out and participate in the women's event today.
Outstanding. So we want to talk today about your military service. Before we do that, do you have any veterans in your family?
Yes. Not my immediate family, my uncle, my mother's brother, and we don't have a very big family, but my mother's brother was in the Air Force from shortly out of high school. He tried college and it wasn't for him, and so he went into the Air Force and did it the hard way through aviation cadet programs and stuff. But that was my only exposure. I didn't spend a whole lot of time because they were gone quite a bit, but that was really my only exposure to the military. We do have a history of military. Mom discovered that one of our ancestors was it was either a piper or a drummer during the Civil War. I can't remember which. My dad's brother did a couple of years in the Navy in 1950s, so not a huge tradition in military service, but a little bit.
Very good. So what about you? What motivated you to enter into military service?
Well, it really kind of started when I was 13 years old, and I grew up in Detroit, and there's an organization you might have heard of called Civil Air Patrol, and it's a cadet program. And so I got involved with that cadet program, and I think my dad will tell you that it will pay tribute to that program for me staying out of trouble growing up in Detroit.
I can see that.
And so it's a auxiliary of the Air Force. Civil Air Patrol is. So we had Air Force uniforms, we did drill, we had Air Force leadership and ethics training, and we trained for search and rescue and stuff like that. So it was almost like a ROTC program, even earlier than ROTC, but it opened opportunities for me. I got a scholarship to fly from the 99s, which is a women's pilot organization, because of my involvement with Civil Air Patrol and whatnot. So a natural follow-on was ROTC at university, which I was on full ride scholarship, so that paid tuition for me. And it was, I graduated from high school in 1980, and the women's movement was just the mid-70s. So we were kind of past the time when women largely became teachers and nurses, but this, I don't know, it was just a trajectory that I kind of rode and swept me along. And it was a way to do something non-traditional, and I loved flying. And so I had my private pilot's license by the time I was a freshman in college, but I could not get a pilot or navigator slot. I had a 98th percentile on the pilot nav portion of the AFOQT, but ROTC only took 6 women a year to pilot training, or to navigator training rather, and I was not going to be one of them according to ROTC. So despite the qualifications and experience, I didn't get to do that. So I did end up on missile crew, which is an operational position. So it's good to have something operational. And that was about the only way a woman could get operational experience, because the opportunities in pilot and navigator were so slim.
So when and where did you start your training in the Air Force?
So when you're in ROTC, your officer training is rolled into your college schedule, and so at the University of Michigan, I had leadership positions, et cetera, and you train, according to your level in the cadet wing, and then you do a summer encampment, which for me was up in upstate New York at what's the name of the Air Force base up there? I can't remember. Anyways, near where Rensselaer Polytechnic is. Anyway, upstate New York. So that was my summer camp. That was my 4-week summer camp. And then, you know, you get commissioned, and I had about 10 days between commissioning and showing up at my first duty location. So,
which was?
My first school was at Wichita Falls. Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas was my weapon system training for Titan II.
Can you tell us what a Titan II is?
The Titan II was the largest single warhead the United States has ever deployed. I cannot confirm nor deny the presence of a nuclear warhead, but you could probably Google it and find out that a Google source might tell you that it's 9 megatons, which, if I did the math right, is the 300 and some Hiroshima bombs equivalent. So it was an awesome responsibility that you, so we didn't, in our system, we didn't know where our weapon was going, but we had a pretty good idea because of the size of the warhead that it was going somewhere in the general vicinity of Russia, the Soviet Union. And
it's a good bet.
Yeah. So it was a strange job because you trained constantly to be able to do it flawlessly, trusting that you would never have to do it. And so it's kind of a weird concept to wrap your head around, that I'm doing this because I never want to have to do this, you know? But deterrence worked, you know, to an extent. It worked. But
how long was that training?
That training is, it was several months in Texas for a weapons system, and then we went out to Vandenberg Air Force Base for emergency war order, which is all the top secret going to war checklist kind of stuff. And then when you get to your base of this assignment, you still have more training there. And so from start to finish, it's was about 6 months training.
So where was your first duty station then?
Little Rock Air Force Base.
I'm sorry, which one?
Little Rock Air Force Base.
Little Rock. Yeah. And so you're actually working in a silo at this point. So tell us a little bit about how, obviously what you can say, but how big of a crew is it you're working with? What kind of shift work are you working? Are you living down there? How's that?
Yeah, none of that's classified. So we would have pre-departure on base at about 6 o'clock in the morning. And they would brief you on either new training items, or they would, you know, we would always get what the response time was to a Soviet threat. And just any announcements, anything that came up. We might have to pick up some equipment. We might have to pick up some classified to take out to the lunch complex. So we'd have pre-departure, then load up the crew vehicle with our stuff, take an overnight bag. We didn't have cooks or anything. We had to take our own jar of peanut butter and loaf of bread, frozen pizzas, which is why a lot of people gained 10 pounds first half year. But drive out to the missile complex, which could be anywhere between an hour and 2.5 hour drive one way. Wow. Change over with the crew that's on site. Take over the complex, be there for 24 hours until the next crew comes in and relieves you. And so we would get there, I'd run my daily shift verification, we'd inventory classified if we needed to, those kinds of things. There might be work on the missile system they might be coming out to do, scheduled maintenance or, repairs. And then as a deputy, as the number 2 officer, my sleep shift was 4 to 8 p.m. and 4 to 8 a.m. It's really hard to make your body go to sleep at 4 o'clock in the afternoon for 4 hours. Yeah. So that usually was a 1 or 2 hour nap. And then I was awake until 4 o'clock in the morning. And then I'd run my, run our verification and then crash in the complex. There was a bedroom in the third. It's kind of like a big bell jar, and the top floor was a kitchen and bathroom and bedrooms, and then a control center, and then some equipment down on the 3rd level. And so I'd lay my head down at 4 a.m. and at 8 a.m. when they were waking me up for shift change, I felt like I had just closed my eyes.
Yeah, no doubt.
And so when you string those together and you have those goofy schedules, for weeks on end, you kind of get a little loopy.
Mhm.
But
So how many people are working on?
4 people, 2 officer and 2 enlisted.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
How far down are you?
It's about 30 feet underground. The control center is a big concrete bell jar, a big concrete. It's basically 3 platforms of concrete dangling inside a bell jar of concrete hanging. And so we had the 2 officer, 2 enlisted during sleep shifts. 2 people were sleeping and 2 people were awake. And that's how our shifts went.
Yeah. So how long did you work inside of the silo? Like your assignment?
Well, I had, when I left there, I had 198 alerts, meaning I went out to complex, 198 times, staying presumably for 24 hours or more. And I was there for from 84 to 87.
Gotcha. So after Little Rock, where did you go?
Went out to the Air Force Academy to be an instructor of English.
Very cool. What was that like?
It was back then. That was the best job in the Air Force. It was considered a plum job back then, and it was a special duty assignment, and you had to compete for it, apply for it. In that case, I was doing my own master's degree, so they weren't going to have to pay for the master's degree. But the odd thing was that I was teaching cadets who, I was 26, and I was teaching cadets, some of whom were prior enlisted, so they were almost my age,
Yeah.
So I was a captain teaching them, and they, but it was great. Teaching is awesome. Grading sucks.
I bet.
So yeah, I did that for about 5 years.
Go to any football games?
Oh, yes.
Of course. Okay, so 5 years in Air Force Academy. That's Colorado, right?
Yes.
Okay. You like it out there?
Oh, I love Colorado.
I bet. I bet.
In fact, in a year when my kids finish high school, I'm going back to Colorado Springs for that's my retirement location. Retirement location.
Yeah, good for you. So when you were there, are you living on base or off base?
So here's where the story gets interesting. I never lived on base because I never had family members, dependents. And I was serving in the closet. I was a gay service member serving closeted under first a gay ban and then don't ask, don't tell. And so if you're single, you have no family members, you don't qualify to live on base.
Gotcha.
So you live off base, which is fine and great and helps you keep your secrets. But the allowances for off-base housing were never meant to completely reimburse you for the costs of living off base. So I had to live off base because I wasn't married or didn't have children, but it cost more to live off base because you only got X amount of allowance, which didn't cover utilities and,
So where are you off to now after Colorado? You served in Colorado. Where did you go?
After Colorado, I got a job at the Pentagon doing executive support for the Secretary of Defense and Deputy Secretary of Defense. So that was a 24-hour shop. And we provided direct support, answered phones and carried luggage for very high-ranking civilians. And that was really neat. It was a 24-hour point of contact for the Secretary of Defense and the Deputy Secretary of Defense. And
what rank were you at this point?
03.
Okay.
Air Force Captain.
I can't imagine how much you learned, though, about the military in a seat like that. I mean...
Well, you learn how things work, and things work at the Pentagon level the same way they work anywhere else. It's who you know, calling on your friends, all those kinds of things. But you're doing it kind of in the lap of history because you don't want to I'm answering. This is long before cell phones and whatnot, so we would get calls, you know, because of the time changes. We'd be connecting Yitzhak Rabin to Secretary Espen, or you know, other dignitaries during BRACs, calls from Congress members and, you know, wanting to connect to the Secretary of Defense to talk about, and the Deputy Secretary of Defense to talk about BRAC. And we did need to stay on the line oftentimes, because if the connection dropped, we were expected to reestablish a connection right away. So we sometimes listened and sometimes didn't listen. So it was an interesting perch, you know, to see how things work.
Any memorable calls?
I remember what Yitzhak Rabin's voice sounded like. I remember what Teddy Kennedy's voice sounded like on the phone. You know, our memorable calls were, so the front office phones rolled over to us at nighttime. So the front office staff, you know, during the daytime, they answered the phones. We would get calls from, we had a regular caller who called herself the Ghost. She would call and she would just say a word in the dictionary and say, the Ghost, and hang up. Animosity, the Ghost, click. Well, one guy called. We didn't have any TVs on. One guy called and said, hey, the plane hit the White House. And my sergeant, he was like, thank you. Another call, hey, man, what's with the plane that hit the White House? Wait, turned on the news, a plane had hit the back of the White House, a small plane.
That little one, yeah.
Yeah. So, so some of our memorable calls were our, you know, our evening cast of characters, our nighttime cast of characters. But we also in that office set up a direct line, a red phone, if you will, between the U.S. Secretary of Defense and the Minister of Defense of Russia, and a secure line, and so that was interesting because I had been on ICBM crew. Now we had test calls, so we had to just chit chat with the Russians on the other end of the line to make sure the call held. The reason being, when we sent the equipment over for those two, for the Minister of Defense and Secretary of Defense to have secure calls, of course the Russians reverse engineered it and put it back together wrong. So we kept having trouble with the call staying on. But I remember one night talking to one of the Russians at the other end and saying, oh, I read this book about the night witches. And they said, the what? The night witches, because it's a language barrier. And I said, Marina Raskova? Oh, Marina Raskova, a great hero, a hero of the Great Patriotic War, you know. So, you know, to have had a missile pointed at the Russians and then talking to them over the phones, and then later in my career, it got even more intimate, doing arms control in former Soviet states. Was just an interesting, you know, as a Cold Warrior, his Cold War trajectory.
Yeah.
You know.
So after Pentagon, where did you go?
After the Pentagon, so I did the Secretary of Defense support, and then I was a speechwriter for the Secretary of the Air Force. So at the end of that Pentagon tour, I had the opportunity to be speechwriter for the very first female service secretary, Secretary Sheila Wynne-Nall. So that was pretty awesome. And that was a year. And then from there, I went up to Newport, Rhode Island to do senior service school, Naval War College, or actually not senior service school, intermediate service school.
Okay.
At the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island.
And how long were you doing that?
That's a year. It's a one-year course. It's a master's degree in national security and strategic studies.
And after Rhode Island, after that 1 year?
And then after that 1 year, I finally got the assignment to Germany I had always wanted. And that
what year is this now?
That was 98. 98 to 2000. I was stationed at Rhein-Main Air Base in Frankfurt. And I was a conventional arms controller.
What does that mean?
So what that means is there's a series of treaties that keeps a balance within Western Europe, Central Asia, Eastern Europe. And these treaties have to do with the end of World War II and even thereafter, right? So we had the Conventional Forces Europe Treaty. So that tells the forces, the former Warsaw Pact forces and the NATO forces, here's how much equipment you can have to defend your border against your neighbors. You know, the Dayton Peace Accords. You may recall that was the agreement worked out in Bosnia, and so we had some inspectors that went and inspected small arms and whatnot. Basically, what it meant was I had to go and learn to identify on site about 575 different pieces of Soviet-built combat aircraft, combat helicopters, armored personnel carriers, battle tanks, self-propelled artillery, towed artillery pieces, and to be able to count them. Now, I'm in the Air Force. A tank looks the same to me as an armored personnel carrier.
Yeah.
Well, the gun on the front of that one's smaller than the barrel out of the front of that one. Yeah. So this was that was all new stuff to me, but it was interesting to learn it. And so then we had to learn the treaties and learn the weapon systems, and then we would go sort of do a surprise inspection in a Warsaw Pact country. So during the time I was there, for example, the Czechs, the Poles, and Poland and Hungary were former Warsaw Pact, but they came over to NATO, so they were kind of like those guys, and then they were us guys, like overnight, which was kind of hard to wrap your brain around. And so those inspections took me to several places in Russia, including Kaliningrad, within a 3-hour ring of Moscow. So, Kostroma was one place. Kazakhstan was one place. I led an inspection mission. And then we had different considerations based on the location. You know, were they east of the Urals? Were they west of the Urals? Was it Black Sea Fleet we were looking at? Was it something else? So we had our treaty and we had our protocols, and we just popped inspections on one another to keep a balance of forces and a balance of contacts in that area that was, you know, the battleground of World War II.
What a cool, I mean, all that travel sounds fascinating though. Did you enjoy that?
I did, and it was not to garden spots, but it was to places that would be very hard for Americans to get to, you know, at the time. So just really super fascinating. And then really fascinating to have started as a Cold Warrior, again, with a nuclear weapon pointed in that general neck of the woods.
Yeah.
And then to be on the ground working cooperatively with former Warsaw Pact countries, including the Russians, to do something cooperative and engaging and, you know, to provide peace and stability in a region that had been so volatile.
So that brings us to 2000, right? The end of the tour there?
Yes.
Okay, and where'd you go then?
So from there, I was due to come back and work on a doctorate to go back to the Air Force Academy as a professor with a PhD. And I got a phone call from the Chief of Staff's staff, and the Chief of Staff needed a speechwriter. So I went and wrote speeches for the Chief of Staff for a year. I had already been accepted to Georgetown's linguistics program, PhD in linguistics at Georgetown University, but I came back and wrote speeches for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force for a year, and then I started my PhD.
Across the street at the Pentagon. Was this at the Pentagon?
So the speechwriter job was at the Pentagon, and then I did that for a year, and then when I started the PhD program at Georgetown University, it was just across the river.
So I'm doing my math here. Were you at the Pentagon on 9/11?
I was not, because the last week of August was when I left my job at the Pentagon to go start over at Georgetown University. So I was on campus at Georgetown University on 9/11.
I know the answer to this question before I ask it, but do you remember where you were when you heard the news?
Yes.
And tell us about that.
So I had been in the library at Georgetown studying for my syntax class. And I saw people coming up to other people and whispering, and then, there was a reaction, and I thought, that's a little odd. And I started walking over to the student union to get a cup of coffee, and similar, I'd pass little groups of people talking, and, isn't that odd? And so when I walked into the student union, into the coffee shop, and heard the news on the radio about the attacks, that's when I heard it. And I did not have a cell phone. That was kind of the transition to cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
So I, found a good old-fashioned payphone and used, no cell lines were getting through on the East Coast, but I was able to call my family and tell them that I was safe, because they knew that I bounced around Washington, D.C. quite a bit and had been at the Pentagon quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it was hard to know what to do that day, because I really wasn't in a situation where I might get called up and deployed, but one of my classmates lived in Annapolis, and she was kind of stuck at my apartment with me all day while we watched what was going on. And to try to get her onto a train so she could get home, we drove around the city that night, and it was just deserted. But I was able to find out that, if you could get to the, there were certain places where she could pick up her train from, to Annapolis from the end of one of the lines out of Union Station or something. I can't remember. Anyway, we got her onto a train and out to Annapolis. But driving through the city, it was ghost town. Nobody was on the streets. No cars were driving. There was the occasional military vehicle on a corner with a couple of troops,
Mm-hmm.
But it was very, very strange. I wasn't, when I saw where the plane stayed, I was in one way thankful, because that Secretary of Defense support job I had was a 24-hour shop. And we would run stuff out to the helipad, we would run stuff down to the motor pool, we would walk the halls at night to stay awake. And so I knew the Pentagon largely like the back of my hand. And if there had to be a good thing about the plane hitting the Pentagon, it hit on the side opposite the daycare center, opposite all the senior leadership, the Secretary of Defense, the service chiefs, service secretaries, and it hit in a section that was newly reinforced
Mm-hmm.
and renovated. When it was hard to tell, I also knew the ring system and the walkway system very well, and it was hard to tell how many rings of the Pentagon the aircraft had penetrated. So I was able to see that, and you feel bad you can't be of assistance, but I thought, how could I not know somebody that was affected by that? But because of the circumstances of the renovation of the Pentagon and the fact that it just got through one ring and where it was located in the building, I didn't know anybody who had been affected. So it was a heck of a day.
Yes, it was. So what was your next assignment?
I was at Georgetown working on the PhD. Decided while I was doing the PhD that Uncle Sam wasn't going to keep me company in my dotage, and pursued getting pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, it involved a lot of science.
Mm-hmm.
I was 40, and I used there's an in vitro fertilization program so I was trying to do inseminations on the economy, kind of on my own, not working because I was older. And so I did in vitro fertilization eventually at Walter Reed. And conceived my kids who were born at Bethesda. So I was doing all of this fertility treatment and trying to get pregnant and IVF and everything while I was doing my PhD at Georgetown University. And so the kids messed up the schedule. They were not due until February of 2004, but they came in December of 2003. They were quite premature.
You say they, so I'm assuming twins.
Twins, yes. So
fraternal or
fraternal, a boy and a girl, and Zach and Zoe. And Zoe was not quite 2 pounds. Zach was 3 pounds 11 ounces. So I spent many weeks going back and forth to the neonatal intensive care unit. And they're both the best kids on the planet and very healthy. And yeah, they're going to do good things for humanity, I think.
Good.
Yeah.
So what's after that? What's your next assignment?
Once I left there, I was all but dissertation. So I was in the midst of getting my dissertation work done. I had done the primary research. And so what happened was I was shipped on over to the Air Force Academy and spent my first year of the following 5 finishing my dissertation, which was picked up by a publisher as a book. So it's a book out there now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
What's the name of that book?
It's called Language and Gender. Wait a minute. That's my own damn book. I can't remember the title.
What's the gist of it?
Language and Gender in the Military, Honorifics Narrative, and Ideology in Air Force Talk.
It's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. It's an academic text, you know, a little dry. But the title of the DoD version is called Talking in the Ranks, Gender and Military Discourse. It's available for free to anybody off of the DTIC because it was Uncle Sam paid for the product, so the product belongs to the taxpayer, so anybody can get a hold of it. The book version is slightly different. I don't get royalties from that, but it's been fairly well cited, and because there isn't really a whole lot of research on gender and language in the military, and then there isn't a whole lot of linguistic study of gender and language in the military, which is to say recording people and dissecting the recording. So I strapped tape recorders to male and female wing commanders, male and female squadron commanders, and male and female flight commanders, and compared the language strategies.
Interesting.
So that was my last assignment, which was to go be a professor at the Air Force Academy from 2004 to 2009. So finished up the dissertation and worked as deputy department head there and taught.
A very full career.
Yes.
So to wrap it up, I got a big question for you. Ready for this?
Yes.
All right. So this, you're going to get a copy of this video, and if you would like to, you could send it across the street to the Library of Congress, where theoretically it'll be there for thousands of years.
Okay. Theoretically.
So Zach and Zoe are going to have kids, they're going to have kids, they're going to have kids, and then somebody might stumble upon this video, one of your great-great-great-grandkids.
Yes.
What do you want them to know about your service to your country?
I would just want them to know that great-great-great-grandma mostly had fun in the military, learned a lot, saw a lot of the world, and did her best to help keep America safe. You know, at the end of the day, that's why Space Force to me is an oxymoron. At the end of the day, the job of the military is to keep Americans safe, whether that means engagement with other cultures, whether it means shooting at them, whether it means shooting with them. But, you know, right now, the United States is an important force for keeping some stability in the world. By the time my great-great-great grandkids see this. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe China's the superpower. Maybe Russia's the superpower. But while we had the gauntlet, we did the best we could with it, I like to hope. We in the military. The elected leadership, gosh, if you're not in the military, your vote's important, because who is in the elected leadership? We had elected leadership that put us in a unnecessary war in Iraq. It cost the nation trillions of dollars. Cost a lot of individuals their sanity. And that all comes down to who you vote for. So, service in the military is very, very important. It's very honorable. And whether or not it's suitable for any one generation could change in a heartbeat.
Very true. Thank you so much for spending time and telling us your story, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
It's very kind of you. Thank you.